Alright, welcome back. So in the last video we studied how to select elements on the page using 5 methods, right? And if you remember, all the interacting that we have to do consisted of two things. First was selecting and the next was changing or interacting, right? Basically modifying, right? So we have covered this part already, and this is perfectly complete with the knowledge you have, right? You don't need a lot more than what you already know right now. So what we're going to move to now is the changing or interacting part, right? So I have the same HTML file here, which I had in the previous video. And yeah, this is what we had. So I'm not changing anything right now. So now we are going to actually start manipulating things, right? So the first thing that we're going to see how you can manipulate is the style, right? So let's say you want to change the color of this h1, right? What you could do is you could do var h1 is equal to document dot query selector, and then here you give h1, right? And now if I see h1, I see I've got my correct element. So now what you can do is, first of all, we'll see the h1 dot style element, right? So in here you can see this is an object, and this has a whole lot of properties, right? A lot of properties, and some of these might be actually recognizable: background color, background image, and you can see it has all the properties that CSS has. And if you have not particularly set them, they are just blank strings, but they are present, right? So this is actually our h1.style object. And what we can do to change the style is we can change some particular property right here. So let's say we wanted to change the color. So I'll go to color here. Here's the color, right? So to change the color, you could simply do h1.style.color. So now first thing, in CSS we had these colons, but in JavaScript you'll have these equals, right? Because JavaScript is basically assigning through equals. It does not use colons for assigning. And in CSS you would simply say, for some things you would not put these quotes, but again this is JavaScript, so you have to follow JavaScript rules, and everything you do will be inside these quotes. And so inside these quotes you can write the same things that you wrote in the CSS. So let's say I want this to change to let's say I'll do red, right? And if I press enter, I see my h1 gets changed to red. And similarly I could do anything. And one property that I do want to show you is the background color. And the reason that I specifically wanted to show you this is because if you remember, then in CSS we had something like background color with a dash in between and the small c. However, this is not just for the background color, for all the things that we'll use in JavaScript, that if you have two kind of words in your whole property or anything, then the first word is always as it is, then the next word is given without a space or a dash, and you just capitalize the first letter. If you remember, I've also told you this before, that this is known as the camel case, right? And JavaScript always follows camel case. So this background color will be set by written like this, and I can do yellow here, and so I see this turns yellow, right? So this is how you could alter styles. And if you want to alter anything, you can basically change anything that you can change to the CSS, because you see we have all the CSS properties present in here, and whatever you want to change, you can change it. We have the border here too. We'll try the border too, right? h1 dot style dot border equal to, I can do 2 pixel solid black, and I get a 2 pixel solid black border outside of this, right? So now we see that this is a simple way to edit the styles through JavaScript. However, it is quite evident that if you want this to be the style for the h1 from the beginning till the end, there's no use of JavaScript, right? You could simply just set this in the CSS file and forget about JavaScript. What's the use? So how you would use JavaScript in this is that the styling would be something else when the page loads, right? Or the styling would be this when the page loads, and on the click of a button or on some event, we'll see how we add events later. But you could add an event inside which you could say that change all these properties, right? And so let's say you had a button here, and initially this was just the default which we had earlier in the beginning, and as soon as you press that button, this changes to this, right? So that you could do through JavaScript because you're adding interactivity, right? So that's the use of this style thing. However, even though this is perfectly legal, but what the focus has been for a long time now is that you need to separate the uses of the three front end things that we use, right? HTML should be used to put elements on the page, CSS should be used for styling, and JavaScript should be used for interactivity. However, if we are doing something like h1.style.something, then we are basically changing the exact style through JavaScript. And while that is fine if you're changing one or two properties, if you are changing a large number of properties at once, it's not recommended to do that through JavaScript. Although that will not make a difference even if you do. But the thing is that it is always better to have as much organization as you can. And to have that organization, it is always better to give your styles in CSS documents. So how can you do that? I mean, if you want to add interactivity, we have seen that we need to have JavaScript. And I'm saying that I want to add styles without JavaScript. So how is that going to happen? So that is done through the next thing that we're going to see. So the style thing is basically over, right? Which is the class list. So if I see the class list thing inside of this h1, I see this is just an empty the DOM token list with length 0, and it has nothing right now. So what this is useful is that I can make my style tag here. I'll not make a style sheet for this one, right? And I can define a class, say, which says I'll add new class, all right? And in this, I'll give my styles, which are, let's say, border, 2 pixel, solid, black, and I can give a the things that I did to that h1 I'll do in here, and I'll say yellow, and I say color is red, right? And right now if I refresh, obviously this isn't working, mostly because we haven't applied this class to anything. So now what I'm saying is that we have defined the styles in CSS, and what we can do through JavaScript is apply the class to it at some point. So initially it does not have that class, but we can make some logic with which if you press a button, that particular class will be applied to it. So basically the only thing you are doing with JavaScript is adding class, adding interactivity. And what you're doing to CSS is adding the styles, which is what we were aiming for. So how you can do that is, basically there are three methods: add, remove, toggle. And all three of them reside inside dot class list. So we saw the h1 dot class list here. Yeah, and I refresh, so obviously there's no h1, and where h1 is equal to document dot query selector h1, right? And if I see h1 dot class list, I see this is an empty array. So how you can do that is h1 dot class list dot add, and in here you give your class name, which was new class, right? So I can do new class, and I see that this has been so I rewrote the JavaScript thing here, of course, right? And again, if I do the same things again, I select my h1, then I do h1.classlist.add new class, and now I see all those properties have been added to my h1. So this is what you could do if you wanted to change the style of something significantly. Of course, if you were just changing the color of something, on the press of a button, and then you wouldn't have to actually make a new class and do class list.add. You could simply change the style by h1.style something something, because that's not a very big problem. However, in good amount of styles, it's always recommended to keep everything separated, right? Styles to the CSS, interactivity with JavaScript. So this is the class list thing, and similarly, will remove the class from it, and I can do new class. First of all, if I see h1.classList now, I see I have one new class in here, and if I added another class too, I could do that. We had an ending array class, so I'll add that here, and now it's added. If I see h1.classList, I have two things, ending li and new class. So you could simply do that, and if I see the HTML right now, I see h1 has class of new class and ending li both. So with the JavaScript, we have changed the HTML, and with the CSS too, we can change the HTML. So that's perfectly fine, right? And now obviously this is not the ending li, so I want to remove that class. How you can do that is you can do class list dot remove, and in here you can give the ending li name, and you can see the ending li class has been removed. And just to give a more better example, I'll do new class here. And so by this, we are removing a new class from this. And now we can add that back. Right? So this was add and remove. Right? So the third thing that we were going to see is the toggle. So basically, imagine a situation in which you wanted to, turn this class on and off on the press of a button, right? So initially there's nothing. You press a button, this class appears. You press a button, this class goes away, and then so on, so on. You can do that infinitely. So of course, you could do that with an if statement. You could check if the class list already has the class, then you remove it. If it doesn't have the class, then you add it. But that would be a good amount of logic, like 4 or 5 lines at least. So what you can use is the toggle function, right? So I can do h1.classList.toggle new class, and let's see what happens. The class goes back, right? And if I do the same command again, it comes, and you could keep doing this again and again and again. So basically what toggle does is, if the class is present, it removes it. If the class is not present, it adds it. And you could have various uses for this. Let's say you were in a to-do list, you are crossing out tasks, right? If on the press of a button, the task gets crossed out. And on the press of a button, if you remember that the task isn't complete yet, you again press the same button and it comes back to pending. So you could have a class with which you could be, adding the effects like the line strike through, and you could be toggling that class. Again, if that example was not clear, don't worry. Basically, what you need to know is that toggle will remove the class if it's present, and it will add the class if it's not present, right? And so that is basically the use of the class list. Right. So the next thing we can move on to is changing the content inside a thing, right? So I'll remove this class. It does not look really good. Yeah. So imagine I wanted to change the content inside of this h1, right? So how could I do that? Basically, I'll show you this thing. If I do h1.text content, it returns me the content of that particular h1, right? So that's simple. You could just change that. You do h1.text content is equal to, let's say, I know basic DOM now. And if you press enter, the h1 changes to I know basic DOM now. So how could this be useful? Imagine having something where you have a score, right? And you want to change the score particularly at, you know, at different points of time. So how you could do that is you could keep a variable which is displayed here, right? And you change that variable and you change the text content accordingly. So you'll see it's used too, but what you basically needed to know was that there's this text content thing inside of this h1 object, which you can change, which will change the HTML to I know basic DOM now, right? All right. So now I have a similar thing, which is the inner HTML, right? And this looks the same in this, but let's do ul dot. I don't have any ul. So I'll clear this out first to show you that, and now I'll select a ul here. Let's say and now if I see what ul is, this is this. And if I do ul dot text content, you see this is what I get. I get simply fruits and cars, right? And if I want to change this, I can, but obviously I'll have to, make this, all of this weird thing. So the next thing is dot inner HTML, right? And if I do that, I see I have LIs here too. So what's the difference? Basically, text content returns only the content that shows up on the page here, right? Only the thing that's showing on the page. But what dot inner HTML does is that it returns the whole HTML inside of that particular element. So the reason why h1 dot text content and h1 dot inner HTML are look the same is because inside the h1 the only thing we have is this text, right? And that is why the text content and inner HTML are same. And even if I change the inner HTML, let's say to this will change to this, and the effect is actually the same as the text content here because there's no HTML inside. But let's see in the UL, if I change the text content to li hello li, and of course I need my closing quote, and I see that the text here becomes li, and if I do li ul dot inner HTML here, this is some weird looking thing, and inside this ul here, my li is not actually read as an HTML tag, right? And that is because if you set something as the text content and you put HTML inside, the HTML is not parsed and it is just treated as simple text. However, you could do something like and now this becomes a proper li, right? And if I see inside this ul, this is an li which has been passed, and the only thing that's showing up is the hello, right? So these were two more things, which is the text content and the inner HTML, right? So we'll see the two last things in the next video, and then we'll be done with basic DOM manipulation. And the only thing that will be left is adding events, right? Yeah, so I'll